Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Hello, Andrea Pacini here from Ideas on Stage. Today I'm here with Matt Essam. Matt is a business coach. He works with freelancers and small businesses, mainly in the creative industry, or maybe only in the creative industry. Matt, feel free to jump in at any time if I say things which are not correct. And he helps them find better clients and also do work they love, which is a great mission. I love that too. And the reason for this conversation is that Matt has a lot of experience with presentations and public speaking. Just to give you an idea, only in the last 2 years, he runs some 60 workshops. He's also spoken at conferences and venues like Google Campus and General Assembly and many others. So today we are going to talk about effective presentations, effective public speaking with somebody who is not one of those experts who tell you what to do, what not to do from a theoretical perspective, but somebody who is out there doing it all the time. And that's why I'm super excited about this conversation. Matt, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be invited on your podcast. I'm a big fan of what you do. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Thank
you, Matt. I would like to start with a question around authenticity, because looking at, you have so many positive reviews online with your workshops. You run a regular workshop in London and in Leeds, if I'm not wrong, right?
Yeah, well, the North in general. So I'd kind of do them between Leeds, Manchester, Sheffield. So the North.
And there are so many positive reviews. And one of the recurring themes that I found on those reviews is that people say that you are a very authentic presenter, a very authentic speaker. So why do you think that's the case? Do you think, based on your understanding and your experience, how do you go about making sure that you appear authentic when you speak in public?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think everybody's definition of authentic is slightly different, right? But for me, I don't want to present in a way that makes me appear any different than I would if you just met me in the street, right? So I don't want this kind of like on stage persona and then this kind of, in the street you bump into me and I'm this weird kind of different person. So for me, I just ask myself, how can I be myself and how can I, act in a way that I would usually act whilst also ensuring that people are kind of getting value from this process. And I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned and enable me to do that is to actually take the focus off of myself. So I'm not really conscious how I'm coming across to people. I'm actually super focused on everybody in the room when I'm giving that presentation. Even when, for example, about 2 or 3 months ago, I oversold a workshop by accident because I always put on a bit more capacity because usually you get quite a big dropout. But we were cramming people into this room, like trying to find extra chairs and stuff. I was like, this is great, but it was quite easy then to maybe get a little bit overwhelmed and feel that pressure because you've got I think we had about 15, 16 people in this kind of boardroom around this thing. And so I just imagined that there were kind of 3 or 4 and I was just chatting to people, in a fairly authentic way. And I wasn't trying to make it too formal. I was just saying, oh, sorry, that we haven't got enough chairs and just kind of joking and stuff with people. And then just led into the presentation. I didn't start it with this super kind of formal thing. But my focus, I caught it at one point, my focus kind of coming into my head. We've all got this like little internal, I call it the monitor. We've got this internal monitor that's constantly going, oh, am I doing the right thing? And what are people thinking of me? And it's constantly going. And so when I'm presenting, I really try and get rid of that, or at least put it to the back of my mind as much as possible. One thing that actually helps a lot for me personally is meditating regularly. It sounds quite strange, but when you meditate, you're kind of practicing just quieting that mind, or at least just the ability to let it go and ramble on thoughts and kind of not engage with it. And it's kind of the same as when you're presenting. And I remember when I was younger, the presentations where I'd really clam up and maybe feel a little bit unnatural or disingenuous or inauthentic was when I was super focused in my head about like what I was saying and how I was coming across. Whereas when I'm presenting now, I actually kind of actively put my attention outside of myself, and I'll be focusing on these people, and I'll be speaking, but I'll be kind of really, my intent is really to kind of speak to them as if we were just speaking like me and you. And so for me, I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons why people say it's quite authentic and natural, is because in my head, I am talking to them as if they are just one person, rather than thinking of it as a kind of room of people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure it makes a huge difference as well in the experience of the audience. And you say that your focus is 100% on the audience, which is great. Now, is there, and of course, any question I ask, if it doesn't lead anywhere, feel free to just tell me, and then I have plenty of questions, so no problem.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
So, is there anything that you do for you to be able to understand your audience, get to know your audience even before you meet them, in preparation for your workshops or your speaking engagements?
Yeah, it depends how big the audience is, right? And it depends if I'm doing it as my own workshop that I'm hosting, or if I'm presenting at somebody else's workshop or conference. So the one thing that I try to do when I'm running my own workshops is do a little bit of research. When somebody buys a ticket, usually you can find them online and figure out what they do. The second thing is I usually try and be as specific as possible in my marketing material, so that I know I'm talking to a certain type of person. So they've been freelancing or running their small agency for 5-6 years minimum, but most of the time it's kind of 10, 12, 15 years sometimes. So when I'm talking, I know that I'm talking to those kind of people. I know what kind of challenges they have because I've had so many of those conversations. So that's directly before the presentation. But actually before I start, and this is one thing that I really learned from sales, is before I even start presenting an idea, I want to get in their world, right? I want to know why they're here, what they're struggling with. So unless I'm doing a big presentation to like 50 people, if I've got between 12 and 15 people in a room, I'll try and make an effort at the start to just say, look, I have 30 seconds each max, because there's 15 people here. So if we all take 2 minutes to speak, it's not going to work. I don't want to hear your life story, but just 30 seconds. Like, what do you do? And what are you hoping to get from today? And from that, I'm really just listening, and I'm listening for the themes. So I can't remember each individual person's, what they say or anything, but I can hear the themes. So, I'd like to find better clients. I'm bored of working on these type of projects, and yada, yada, yada. So then I've got those themes in my head, and it's a little bit like, I don't know if you've ever read horoscopes or whatever, but I used to kind of read them when I was a kid, like you read your star sign in the paper, and there's this crazy thing that happens where you feel like it's talking to you, but it can't be talking to you, right? Because there are so many people that are born in that same month. But because you're talking about things that people relate to, they make that about them. So they relate their experience to the thing that you're talking about, as long as there's enough kind of crossover. In the psychology world, it's kind of known as cold reading. So you say things that think apply to people. And sometimes even if they don't, what they do is they kind of say, yeah, but then maybe correct the bit of it that wasn't quite right. And so I'm constantly listening for those things, so that before I even present my ideas, I'm reinforcing the symptoms, the things that they're experiencing. So they're like, yeah, I'm totally in the right place here. Like, that's exactly what I want, or that's exactly what I'm experiencing. So that when I start talking about these things, the kind of solutions or the ideas, then all of a sudden people are listening because they feel like it's about them, rather than me just rocking in and being like, hey, anyway, my name's Matt, I'm great. And anyway, this is how you should run your freelance business and blah, blah, blah. Like, you just kind of don't get that rapport and that connection. So I feel like that kind of answered your question, but feel free to dig a bit.
No, it did. And I think it's a very simple thing that you do, but extremely effective. What you're doing is you're taking, when you have 10 people in front of you, you are taking just 5 minutes from your presentation to actually get to know your audience and understand what they need, what they expect from their workshop, which makes a huge difference. So that's great. Now, let's talk a little bit about, and I don't know whether it's relevant to you, but this idea of, I also run my own events, and one of the questions I get asked all the time is around being nervous when speaking in public. What's your experience? Do you feel nervous before your workshops or before speaking maybe a larger conference talk? What's your experience with that?
Yeah, yes and no, right? So by and large, no. But I think if you're completely void of any form of anxiety or nerves, it probably means that you aren't really like, you're not bothered about the thing, your mission, I think there's got to be a little bit of, I really hope that I deliver value to people, and I hope that there's some kind of follow up on the back of this, because otherwise, if there wasn't that, then I think you'd just be too blasé about it, and you wouldn't do the preparation, and you wouldn't be fully in it, kind of thing. So to an extent, there's always an element of, I'd actually call it excitement rather than nerves. And they are two very, very closely related things. And I think really the only thing that changes excitement from anxiety and vice versa is our definition of it, right? So it's the same feeling, but we either say we're excited and we've got all this energy, or we're really nervous and we've got all this energy. So when I feel that energy, which is kind of a natural part of presenting, because it's a kind of biological response really to getting up in front of a crowd of people. When I feel that, I interpret that as, this is my energy, and I use it in my presentation. I almost imagine it kind of coming out. And instead of that being nerves, I'm kind of trying to use that to emphasize a point. Or I sometimes even visualize, if I'm really trying to get a point across, I will actually visualize that energy kind of coming out of my body, and I'll kind of push it into someone, sometimes with like hand gestures or whatever. And it sounds a bit kind of extreme, but I think you have to use that energy, right? So I don't really get nervous in the way that I used to maybe at school, if I had to go up and give a speech or something. That's like really nervous, but I still have that kind of nervous energy.
There is something. I think it was Mark Twain who said that there are only two types of speakers: those who get nervous and those who are liars.
Yeah.
So there is always something, right?
Yeah.
But you're right.
I think the more you do it, I got to a point, and again, this year will be the same, where I'll do kind of 2 workshops a month. And sometimes I'll do things in between those as well. So often I could have, and sometimes the way they fall, I could have 1 a week. So by the 3rd one, I'm not nervous, and I'm pretty chilled, but I'm still anxious or worried about people getting value. So I'm always concerned whether people are getting it, right? I'm always concerned whether my audience are having those light bulb moments, whether they're finding it valuable. Because if they're not, then it's essentially a waste of their time. So what I don't want to do is waste anyone's time, right? So I've always got that concern, but I think you can't ever really control that. All you can do is get feedback. And see if people you can see they're just not getting it, and you're like, does that make sense? And they're kind of just staring there blankly. It's like, you can say, so John, what's your experience of this? Or like, how did you feel about that point? And then sometimes you might just bring that out of someone and get their worldview and be able to tell them a slightly different metaphor or story, and all of a sudden they kind of start to see,
they get it,
what you mean, right? I think if you don't have that, you become a bit complacent.
And have you had in all of your workshops and events that you did, have you ever had an experience, a situation where you had to deal with either I wouldn't say a hostile audience, but maybe some negative people in the room? And if not, I can change the question. But if you had, then what was your experience? How do you go about addressing the negative people in the room?
Yeah, I mean, I have luckily, touch wood, only on a couple of occasions. I think one of the reasons for that is because a lot of the workshops that I run tend to be, they're not invite only because they are technically open to the public, but most of the way that I promote them is I actually find people that I think would get value from them and I invite them directly. But yes, there's one particular workshop that springs to mind, and people still actually talk about it today. So I got a couple of clients from the back of that workshop. And they basically said, you know, this guy just kind of ruined the workshop for everybody else, because no matter what you said, he had a kind of like counter argument to that. And when he started, I kind of thought, right, I'm just going to kind of let this go and say, all right, yeah, sometimes that does happen. But after kind of 3 or 4 times, I just got to that point where I just snapped, and I was like, it wasn't even about me. It was about how you could tell everybody else in the room was like, who is this guy? You know, because it was only there was probably 6 or 8 people in the room. And I just said to him, look, let's just say his name was John. I said, hey, John, it sounds to me like you've kind of got all this stuff figured out. Like what I really don't want to do is I don't want to waste your time, because time is the most valuable resource we have. So look, everyone here kind of has come because they're open to these ideas. It sounds like you're not. So maybe it's best that, you know, you don't carry on in this workshop any longer, because I wouldn't want you to just go over things that you already know. And then that allows me to kind of serve these guys a bit better. Like, what do you think about that? And he was really kind of taken back by it. He was like, no, I am open to it, but I'm just sharing my experience. And I said, well, you know, there's different ways that we can do that. And I'm sharing my experience with you. So if you just counter everything I'm saying, you know, what value do you think that's bringing to the rest of the group? And he kind of, and I'm so glad that I did address it. And in the end, people said to me, oh, I feel like you handled that quite well. But in my head, because there was quite a lot of like emotional fuel around that, I was looking back, and I was actually recording it at the time. And I thought, oh God, I really don't want to watch this back, because I feel like I handled that really badly because there was a lot of emotion with it. But I think, you know, in hindsight, I probably kept my cool.
You addressed it in the right way.
Yeah, I think there's always stuff that you, in hindsight, you would have done differently or better, right? I think overall, the worst thing would have been to have ignored it.
Exactly.
Because you kind of like give them that power then, or, you know, like succumb to it. I think like address it straight up. But I learned that technique actually from Tony Robbins, where you kind of interrupt someone's pattern, reverse it on them, and you basically say, like, you're dead right. You know, you are dead right. Like it sounds like this stuff is not going to work for you at all. And you know what? I would hate for you to waste your time, because you're obviously really good at what you do. So your time is super valuable. So John, I think it'd be best if you probably just left and, you know, we'll catch up after this or whatever. And they're like, whoa, what the hell? Because they can't really come back to that, because you're saying it from an intention of their benefit.
Yeah.
Like you're screwing up this whole workshop and having to go at them, and you creating that hostility. You're totally getting on board with them, but you're kind of firing back at yourself, being like, yeah, this is my bad. You know, I should have made this more clear in the description that it wasn't for people that have all the answers and already know how to do it, because, you know, you're not going to get any value from it.
It's a great strategy. Great strategy.
Yeah.
And Matt, also in terms of and tell me where you are in this spectrum, because based on our experience, that we see there are a couple of types of presenters, and I'm curious to know where you are. Now, we have those who feel more comfortable with more freedom on stage, let's say, without perhaps memorizing their talk or their even script word for word. And I call them the improvisers. And then you have those for whom the very idea of getting up in front of an audience without knowing exactly what to say and when makes them feel very stressed. And these are we call them the learners, improvisers and learners. And there's no right or wrong approach. The way I see is that there is only the approach that works for you. And it's a spectrum. So you have the improvisers, the learners, and everything in between. So I'm curious to know, where do you see yourself in this spectrum?
So I would say that I'm definitely more towards the freestyle, you know, non-structured area. But the way that I structure my presentations is that I actually use kind of anchors throughout. So if you imagine a road and you're going down the road, and there's kind of like lampposts all the way down. So I've got something on each one of those lampposts. So the worst case scenario, I'm going backwards or forwards to that lamppost. But in between, I'm kind of doing what I want. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. I love the analogy.
So yeah, it's like, I don't want to be constrained by, I've tried before memorizing things, but then I lose it slightly word for word. And then that flummoxes me a little bit. And then, so what I find is I want an anchor to talk around, and I know a specific set of phrases or things that have maybe got people's attention in the past. So I probably just have those in the back of my mind, and I won't always say them, but often I will. And they're just little catchphrases, little, ideas or insights or metaphors or whatever that just exist. And they exist throughout my slides as well, often as prompts. But I've done it in the past where I've rocked up to events and they just haven't had a screen, or the screen's been broken or something. So I'm literally going from either my memory or kind of some prompts on my laptop slides that I'm looking at whilst trying to keep everyone engaged that doesn't have anything to look at. So when I first started learning how to do better public speaking, and I had to do things like 60-second elevator pitches and things like that, I would actually use something called loci. I don't know if you've ever heard of loci. It's like a memory technique where you have loci or memory palaces. They're often
Yes, the memory palace. Yeah, I know it. Yeah.
So you have something like a room in your house, and you attach different parts of the presentation to the room, and you kind of imagine yourself walking through the house. And I used to do that quite frequently. If I had to change things, or if I had to really condense something into like 15 minutes, I would remember that to the point where it was almost word for word if it was short enough. And you can do it with longer presentations, but I tend to find that it's quite limiting if you do that. The other thing that it really forces me to do is not ramble and waffle and not have lots of filler words. So if I know there's the next lamppost I'm aiming for, trying to get to, what I don't want to do is kind of say lots of random things that aren't necessarily too related to that. So I always want to keep bringing it back to the first lamppost or back to the lamppost behind. So this is what we just talked about. So remember, we just talked about that. Now we're going to talk about this. So it kind of goes around the whole framework of, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you just told them. But it's just a good reference point. So in my head, I kind of know what that looks like.
Yeah, great. And so considering that you are more of an improviser, let's say, do you still though rehearse your presentations?
Not unless it's brand new. So the workshop that I've got, I'll tweak it, but I know the framework well enough now to just kind of go, oh yeah, I pulled out that slide and I did this and I changed that. And sometimes it catches me off guard, but I can't, it's not that I can't justify it. It just doesn't feel right as a feeling to practice that workshop. I'll go through the slides for the presentation, but rarely do I actually practice out loud, purely because I'm doing it so regularly that it doesn't really feel necessary. Whereas if, tomorrow I got a TED Talk and it was a kind of new topic, a new concept, and I sat, then hell yeah, I would rehearse that until the cows come home.
And out of curiosity, say for an important presentation, it could be a TEDx Talk, as you mentioned, and I'm sure you get to that point.
Yeah.
How many times would you rehearse that?
Yeah, I think that's a kind of how long is a piece of string question. I think you get to the point where it's a little bit like playing a musical instrument. I find sometimes I've got my learning curve when I'm learning like piano or something is very steep. So at the start, piano teachers or someone listening would get super frustrated and they'll be like, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, you just played that same bit about 400 times. Like, why can't you get that? And then all of a sudden, like, boom, it will just come together. And within a few days, I can play the whole piece. I'd be like, whoa, that's so weird. And I think my brain just works like that because it works the same in recall as well. So if I could play a song, but haven't played it for a while, and I start to forget how to play it, I'll frustrate the hell out of my friends sitting there, mashing the wrong chords, And they were like, mate, you can't play the song, like give up, stop trying. Then all of a sudden it will just come and boom, I can play it like through perfectly. And they just go, whoa, what just happened there? You know? So I think for me, it would be more about practice it. And then there would just be a moment where I've just got this, like I can just feel that I've got it. And I think it's more of a feeling than it is you have to practice this amount of times and do
And just out of curiosity, the piano analogy, was it just an analogy or do you actually play the piano?
No, I do actually play piano. Yeah. I set myself this crazy, I was trying to figure out how to set goals in a way that actually allows you to achieve them and set quite ambitious goals. And I read lots and lots of books and lots of literature on it. And I've always been quite fascinated with it. And I decided to kind of break it down myself. So I knew the principles, but I thought, well, maybe it's slightly different for me. You know, we all learn in slightly different ways. And so I kind of looked at times in the past where I'd achieved things which were fairly significant in my life. And I thought, well, what was it about? Like, what were the common elements to that process that really allowed me to achieve that? And I picked these kind of 3 or 4 things. I won't actually go into the detail, but I set myself this goal of learning a grade 8 piano piece, quite a famous piece called Clair de Lune by Claude Debussy, which is the kind of, if you've ever seen Ocean's 11, when they rob the bank at Bellagio and the fountains go up, that beautiful bit of music that's playing in the background. And bearing in mind, I'd only ever really got to grade 2 piano. So that's, I could play, play a few Coldplay songs. I can't really sight read music. And anyway, I set myself the goal of being able to play this grade 8 piece of music in a year. And I really just sat down for 20 minutes every single night. And I went on YouTube and I found a guy that had broken this whole piece down into segments. I just practiced until within, I think it was just over a year. I think it was about 13 months where I could just sit down and play that bit of music through.
On your own?
On my own, yeah. Without any like sheet music or anything. And yeah, it was just really a thing because I'd always wanted to play it, but also, sometimes we have these limiting beliefs in our head about what's really possible. I kind of just wanted to put that to the test and just say like, it is only a piece of music and it sounds complicated, but I'm sure if you break it down, it's not that difficult. And I just did. And it's one of those things where unfortunately I went through a period of about 6 months where I didn't play it regularly enough. So there are now parts of that song where I stumble on and I kind of forget little bits. So I have to go back now and practice it again. But at the time, my parents were like, what the hell? I got a piano for like one of those electric keyboard pianos for Christmas one year. And I think they thought I wasn't really going to play it because I had when it was younger and just kind of messed around on it. And then they came to visit and I put that piano piece and my mum was like almost in tears because she was like, where did that come from? Like, that's incredible. And it is one of those pieces of music that when you hear it, it's such a beautiful piece of music and it sounds very complex in a lot of parts. So yeah, that kind of learning curve. And I think going back to public speaking, I think especially if you're just getting into public speaking, it can feel like there are a lot of moving parts, and it can feel very intimidating. And I think the frequency that you do it is probably more important than the structure and everything else. I think the reason why I now feel like people tell me I'm an authentic speaker and I'm a good public speaker is because I've done so much of it over the past 2 years. I didn't start off like that. You can even go on my LinkedIn profile and see one of my early talks, I think probably in 2015, where people still say, oh, you're quite comfortable, but I am arming and ahhing and there's no real structure to it. And I'm basically just on stage kind of talking and being a bit like weird and awkward. And if you can compare that to some of the stuff that I've done recently, they're worlds apart, right? But what people don't realize is that, like you said, in between that period, I've done 60 workshops and probably then a few talks and things on top of that. So the point you get to where you just rock up and there's a room full of people, it just doesn't faze you anymore. So it becomes, what's the word? Subconscious or unconsciously competent to a certain degree where you focus on the things that are really important rather than the things that maybe you think about when you're first public speaking, like, have I got those slides right and all of the other stuff that goes on in your head.
Yeah. And you mentioned before limiting beliefs. And I think this is connected also. Let's move a little bit towards your experience with sales presentations.
Yeah, sure.
Now, limiting beliefs, I think also if you give a sales presentation, and I know you have experience with that, the audience also, and it could be potential clients, also have their own limiting beliefs in relation to maybe in relation to you, in relation to the service you offer, in relation to what you are presenting, and maybe their ability to be able to work with you or to achieve certain objectives. How do you address those limiting beliefs on the part of the audience?
There's actually a really great book, which you've probably read, called Expert Secrets by Russell Brunson.
Yes.
And he talks about these 3 types of beliefs. So we have 3 different types of beliefs. Let's see if I can get this right. There's the external belief about the vehicle, in terms of like the thing that is going to get you there. So let's say in your example, it's public speaking. They have the external belief around resources. So time, money, effort, energy to get that. And then they have the internal belief about themselves and their own ability. Does that make sense? Could you hear that? I just got a little message saying that my internet is unstable.
No, I heard you perfectly. Okay, yeah.
Cool. So what's interesting about that is you have to almost take into consideration those 3 different categories, because if you just address one, then they say, yeah, I get that. I'm on board with that now, but I don't think I'm that type of person, right? I'm not the type of person that's good at public speaking, or I'm not the type of person that does X, Y, and Z, right? So the first thing is to realize that there are those kind of 3 categories, and then get really clear on what those things are. And I think you can only really get clear on what they are through conversations. You can make guesses, but for me, the one thing that I always do now is I always follow up with people that have been to workshops. And if they haven't booked in to have a call with me, or they haven't shown any interest in the next step that I presented at the workshop, then I'll always say, so just out of curiosity, what was the main reason why you didn't take that next step? And so that's when you get to learn about people's limiting beliefs, right? Because, I thought it sounded great, but I don't really have that X, Y, and Z, and so, that's interesting. Okay, cool. And so then I'm like noting that down. So the next presentation I do, I will then frame those into the presentation. So there's kind of 2 parts to this answer. So the first part is kind of being acknowledged those 3 different categories. And then the question you said was, well, how do you actually address those things? And I think there are 2 really important things that have to happen if you're going to change or challenge someone's belief, right? So if you just said, let's imagine that we want to sell bicycles, because it's just like a really simple thing, right? And I said, like bikes are great. They get you around really quickly in London, because like there's loads of traffic and you're actually going to get there faster than if you took the taxi. They're great for the planet. They're great for your health. They're great for financially, yada, yada, yada. But if fundamentally somebody doesn't believe in the concept of bikes, like they don't think that they're a good thing, then you can talk all day about the benefits of that thing. But if they have a fundamental belief that in some way bikes are dangerous, or, they're too expensive, or whatever it is, then they've just tuned out to that noise, right? So you're first presenting the benefits and stuff before you've really got in their world. So the first thing you need to figure out is, what are those beliefs? Right? What is going on? But not just the belief, but the symptom that they're experiencing that has made them have that belief, right? So let's say they used to ride their bike in London, but they got knocked off by a taxi or something, right? So it's like, you start with who's ever got knocked off their bike or almost knocked off their bike in London, right? And so then you see those people, and it's crazy, isn't it? And there's cars and nobody looks and yada, yada, yada. But what if I told you that there's one reason that 90% of people get knocked off their bike? And people are like, okay, that's interesting. right? So you first have to meet them where they are, because if you don't meet them where they are, whatever you say, it's going to be their kind of reptile monkey brain. Just, no, that's my belief. That's my belief. That's my belief. It's only until you get them where you are and you go, yeah, like that. I get that. I've experienced that. London's terrible. You know, it's polluted. People knock your buses. They don't look where they're going, and taxis and unlicensed drivers and yada, yada. I get that totally. People are like nodding their head because that's the experience they've had, right? And then you just say, well, let me tell you, there's one thing, there's one reason why that mainly happens, right? And it's because of, you know, I don't actually have the solution, but let's just theoretically, you know, it's because you don't have this vest thing that like is super luminous and like there's no way that anyone could ever miss you or whatever. And so you've got to go there first in terms of the symptoms they're experiencing before you present that solution. So you have to acknowledge the belief and almost like get on their side before you can challenge it. Because if you just go straight in and challenge it, then you're just going to get resistance. So like one of my favorite sayings is, I think Tony Robbins again, is if you want to influence somebody, you have to know what already influences them. Right. And so I think in my experience, people don't spend enough time figuring that out and getting on the same page and telling stories about either your experience or your client's experience or somebody else's experience that's like, yeah, totally. That was me. I'm there. I'm in that story. That was me. But then all of a sudden there's this new kind of revelation, this new thing which shows them that actually that experience they had was a kind of one-off experience, or is an experience that they were having because they were doing a certain thing. And there is actually another way that they can experience this, but they've just never seen it because that thing happened and they formed this belief that bikes are bad. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I also wanted to ask you, you mentioned before, just now, you mentioned stories. You tell a story about this, you tell a story about that. Why do you need to tell a story instead of just talking about an idea or the message itself?
Yeah, it's a great
Why
question.
stories?
Yeah, I think it's just human nature, right? It's like thousands and thousands of years. That's how we've communicated. We really, the thing that gets us emotionally is the story. We can have the logic all day long, right? We can know logically that bikes are good for the environment and that they get us there faster. But if we've had an emotional experience where that we can vividly remember, which is where we got knocked off our bike or almost got knocked off our bike, that will trump everything, right? The driver behind all human behavior is emotion. And the best way to tap into someone's emotion is through the power of stories.
Yeah. And also, Matt, another thing you mentioned before is you started talking about the next step. So you need to address certain objections and limiting beliefs for you to be able to take your audience to the next step.
Yeah.
Is there anything you do when you give a sales presentation to make it easier for you to take them to the next step, or for them to accept the next step, which could be either buying on the spot, or maybe the next step is very simple. It could be, okay, let's have a follow-up conversation. So how do you go about that?
For me, because at this stage, I don't have a huge amount of kind of collateral out in the world. You know, like I said, I mentioned to you before we actually started this call, I've just finished my book, and I'm getting to the point where I've got the resources to put out more content and things. But at this moment in time, most people aren't that familiar with me before they come to a presentation, whether it be a sales presentation or somebody else's. So for me, and probably like quite a lot of your audience, I imagine, not having all that stuff out there means that you have to take people on that journey slightly slower. Because otherwise you end up kind of proposing on the first date, which, you know, scares most people away. So the way that I do that is I make that next step as easy as possible, and I make it as low risk as possible. And I also I use a bit of kind of qualification criteria. So I say, look, this is who this next step is for.
Mm.
Even if we never work together, this is what you're going to get out of it.
Mm.
Right? So instead of kind of saying like, oh, you know, you need to sign up for this and this is how, blah, 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 I just say, I almost reverse it in the way that I kind of say, this might not be for you. Right? You know, if you're not, as an example for me, right, my core program, my 6-month accelerator is like between £2,500 and £3,000, right? So reality is, if as a freelancer or a small business, you're not generating at least 30 grand a year in revenue, this probably isn't for you, right? It's just not, because the amount of money that you need to invest now to get that result in the next 6 to 12 months is going to be a huge chunk of your income, and it's probably going to be high risk and all of this kind of stuff, right? And also, if you can't even get to 30 grand, how confident am I that I can help you get to 60? Whereas if you're nailing 30 and you're just a bit busy and not with the right kind of work, then I'm pretty confident I can help you, right? So by putting that clear, this is who it is for and this is who it's not for out there, people don't feel like you're just trying to sell them something. And then the other thing I say is, look, you might meet all these criteria and I still might not work with you, because I'm very, very specific about who I work with, because everything I do is based on results. So if I'm not confident that we're going to get the result, then I don't want to take you on as a client, because it doesn't look good for me. It's not good for you. So I'm almost kind of taking it away from them a little bit and saying like, look, this conversation is let's get you a plan of action for the next 6 months, right? Let's get really clear on where you want to be. And look, if you want us to help you get that, and you want us to speed up that process, and you want to help with the implementation and everything, then cool. We can have a conversation about that at the end. But first, let's get really clear about where you are now, where you want to be, and what's standing in the way. And for most people, that's quite a high value proposition, because as freelancers or small business owners, they don't take that much time out to kind of think about that stuff. And oftentimes on that strategy call, that's the first time anyone's really asked them that question of like, where do you want to be in 12 months time? Or, you know, if money was no object, what would be different in your business? Or, you know, I've got lots of great questions because I'm a coach. So that's, you know, in my arsenal. But often people, the reason I think they go and write good reviews on Amazon, on Google, is because they get a lot of value just from that conversation. And I think that's important, because even if they don't decide to work with you now, in their mind, you're valuable, and having a conversation with you is valuable. So when I pick up the phone to them in 3 months time and I go, hey, Jeff, you know, we had that call 3 months ago. This is what we talked about. We decided that the program wasn't right for you right now, but I just wanted to check in and see where you're at, and yada, yada, yada. Like, that's quite a welcome call, because they got some value from that. It wasn't just like, right, you need to buy this now, and if you don't, then, well, there's no point in us ever talking again, kind of thing. Yeah. So that's a slightly long-winded answer to your question.
No, it's a great answer. Great answer. I'm loving your answers, Matt. I'm enjoying this conversation. Also, on the next step, and again, if it's not relevant, I can change the question. Is there anything that you do to perhaps create some sort of either urgency for them to take the next step, or scarcity, something
around? So there's a couple of things. So my next step is essentially a strategy call, right? And a strategy call is a 45-minute call, usually like this, over Zoom. And really the purpose of that call is twofold. Is number one, to figure out where you want to go, you know, what's standing in the way, and where you are now. And then the second thing, I know that's 3 things, but within the context of that. And then the second thing is to figure out whether I can help, or we can help, and whether you would like us to actually help you accelerate that process and implement some of those things that we've decided. So I do a couple of things in order to get, to create some, not scarcity, but some demand, I think. Number one, I only have a limited amount of those sessions in there. So I have a sign-up sheet with 5 slots, 5 times on there. And there's usually 10 to 12 people in a room, right? I only want 5 strategy calls off the back of each one of those workshops. And that's averagely, if I put 10 out, I'd probably still get 5 or 6. So I put 5 out, and then people are like, oh, well, there's only 5 spaces. There's 10 people around. Like, I quite want to do this. Sometimes it works against me because I've actually called people up previously and said, why didn't you book in for a strategy call?
Because there was no space.
Yeah, either because there was no space, or they were like, oh, well, it just seemed that there were other people there that wanted it like more than I did, kind of thing. So doesn't always work. But and the second thing is that I do is that I say that, like, so if you want to book that same 45-minute strategy call just through my website, you can, but I charge £149 for it. So if you put your name down on this piece of paper today, it's free. You can do it again in 3 months if you want, but it's going to cost you £149.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
So it's up to you.
Well done. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. Yeah. Right.
And that's genuinely because obviously, like, I have a certain capacity. I can't just give away unlimited amounts of strategy sessions and just let people. And I don't like that. You know, the strategy session is valuable, right? I believe it's worth £149. I've never had someone have a strategy session for £149 and say, I didn't find that valuable, I want my money back. So I know it's valuable. It's just that I want those people there to be in the momentum of taking action. If I then say, yeah, cool, like you can book it whenever, then they won't, because they go away, they get back to their computer, they got a bunch of emails from their clients and they never do anything. So it's for their benefit as much as it is for mine. And I'm thinking about what do these, because that's half of the problem. They're caught up in the day-to-day of their business. Yeah. So if I don't create some kind of demand or I don't force them into action, then they're never going to do it. And I'll speak to them again in 6 months' time and they'll be in the exact same space that they were when they came to the workshop, which isn't serving anyone, is it? Because
it benefits them as well. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. It just means that they wasted their time at the workshop if they don't do anything about it. Right.
Yeah. And is there, and again, if there isn't, no problem at all, but is there anything else that you do from a practical perspective, maybe even from a logistics perspective, to make sure that your workshops, your sales presentations are successful? Again, if there isn't anything, I have another question already.
I'm sure there are other things, but nothing springs to mind right now.
Okay. So, and I think it's perhaps the last question I'd like to ask you. Now, you help freelancers and small businesses in the creative industry do work they love. Mm-hmm. So you are very much connected to this idea of having and correct me if my assumption is incorrect, but this idea of doing something because there is a purpose behind, there is something of value. And I guess that's also an important element when it comes to your own workshops, your own delivery, your own sales presentations. So do you think that making it very clear for the audience why you do what you do, why you are offering whatever it is that you're offering, is important in a sales presentation? And if that's the case, why is that important? How do you go about making it clear to them what your purpose is, what your why is?
Yeah, totally. I think it's massively important. And I think the reason it's so important is because, you know, like Simon Sinek, right? Start with why. People buy why you do what you do, not what or how you do it. But more importantly, it kind of makes you human. And when you get really passionate about a purpose and a why, it gets other people fired up, right? And it inspires them. Otherwise, you kind of just come across like you're trying to sell people something, which really isn't the case. You know, it's actually the other way around. I'm giving something away for free in that workshop, and I'm very specific about who I work with. So for me, like, the purpose is the thing that people buy into. Really, it's not so much the how or the what. They kind of don't care about that to an extent. Very few people, when I'm having a qualifying conversation about coming on one of my programs, really want much more detail than I've got in the brochure, which is kind of roughly what the 6 modules about. They kind of like, they're buying that end result, they're buying that outcome, they're buying the meaningful work because they know what it's like to have done monotonous bread and butter work for so long, right? So for me, without that purpose, without that kind of, look, this is why I do what I do, and sharing that story, you just don't get that same emotional response from people, and people can't relate to it as much because your purpose, everyone's purpose, I believe, is born from their story. So without me sharing that story, it's very difficult to really, I can say, my purpose is, it's actually less about doing work you love, because I feel like that's a little bit cliched and like overdone. For me, it's about doing work that has meaning and purpose, but more importantly, like has a positive impact in the world. So when I tell my story, I'm like, I was working in these big creative agencies. Then I built my business, and I thought the thing I wanted to do was travel the world and, hang out on a beach in Thailand with this laptop, and it all seemed great. But the reality was I was deeply unfulfilled, right? And it took a death in my family for me to wake up and be like, life is short. There's all this, I've worked so hard. I've got a good university degree. I've gone and done all these things that I thought I should be doing. I've got all these brands on my portfolio. Why the hell am I sitting here with this real sense that there must be more to life? There's more going on. And when I share that story, people, although they haven't necessarily been on the exact same journey, they get it, because they're like, yeah, that's how I feel. And that's some of the things that I was saying to myself. And that's where my purpose was born from. I didn't want to just help myself find meaning. I wanted other people, because I saw more creative people in the world who were super talented, who had so much potential to go and do some really cool stuff, but they weren't doing it because they thought that they needed to do X, Y, and Z to get to where they wanted to be, or they were worried about paying the bills, or they just hadn't quite figured out how to find that niche and that purpose. So they were just kind of plodding along, doing these things, adding more stuff to their portfolio, and it wasn't serving anyone, and it kills me when I talk to people in their 40s and 50s who look back and they're like, oh, I wish I'd done, they come on a program and they get, oh, I wish I'd done this 10 years ago. I wish this existed when I first started on my journey, because it's one thing to have regrets about something you did that didn't work out, but it's another thing to have a regret about not doing something and not taking that risk, and acknowledging that actually, yeah, you kind of just floated down the stream for 10 years and you didn't fucking put your oar in and steer the boat and really decide where you want to go. And that's, that can be a hard pill to swallow. And I feel grateful that at my age, and, I'm privileged that, I've got a good family to support me, and, all those kind of things. Like, I feel privileged that I've discovered that at an early age. And I really do feel this strong sense of purpose. And I really do get off coaching calls and my clients feeling great and energized and like I've really made a difference. And, I get paid pretty well for it. So, it's an honor and a privilege to say that, but I want that for other people, because it lights me up when I see people discovering their purpose and going, do you know what? Fuck this. Like, I don't care about these brands anymore. What I really care about is, sustainability or whatever it is. And they get fired up and they go off on this mission. Like, that's what you want, this feeling that you've put people out in the world on this mission that are doing things that they really care about and causes that are going to, without sounding too cliche, make the world a bit of a better place. Like, we don't need more logos and, like brands and shit. Like, we don't need it. What we need is people out in the world doing stuff that lights them up and that's going to help other people.
Totally. And
run over.
No, I think that talking about the why and the purpose is the perfect place to end our conversation. And before we wrap up, Matt, is there anything else perhaps that you'd like to add? Any questions you would have liked me to ask you and I haven't done it? Is there anything else?
No, I think you've been an absolutely fantastic host. I want to say thanks for inviting me on the podcast. If there's anybody in your audience that are listening who kind of resonated with our conversation today, and they're freelancers in the creative industries, or they know some freelancers in the creative industries, then look me up. Just Google my name. I've got a pretty unique last name, so I tend to come up in searches. But I've also just finished my book, so that's going to be launched on the 15th of March, and it's actually going to be free for 24 hours on the Kindle version. I'm going to put it out for free. Like, people can grab a copy of that and basically hear a bit more about that journey and really understand how to kind of find that sense of purpose and do more meaningful work.
What's the title of the book?
It's yet to be decided. It's currently out for poll. We've got about 3 or 4 different options at the moment. So the end of this week.
Can I ask what couple of options if you have some time?
Yeah, sure. So why don't I just quickly tell you? I'll read them out.
Yeah. In case anybody's interested.
Yeah, totally. So we've got a few, and I'd love to know your thoughts on some of them. So the ones that have made the short list at the moment are unlock your creative potential, how to uncover your greatest strengths and build a freelance business you love, create and conquer, a freelancer's guide to having more freedom, creative control, and financial stability. And then the last one is stop saying yes, start saying no. And then there are various kind of subtitles that go along with that, but it's essentially about, stop just taking referrals and saying yes to everything, and actually start getting really active and choose who you want to work with.
Now, my first reaction to this list, but it's just a very first reaction. So I like the second one.
Yeah,
I like the second one with the subtitle of the third one.
Okay.
So
as in create and conquer, and then the
no. The second title was the second one you gave me.
Unlock your creative potential. No, that was the first one. The second one was create and conquer, and then the third one was stop saying yes, start saying no.
Okay, I think there was another one in between, but anyway, we'll take it offline.
was it a sub? Maybe it was a subtitle.
Yeah, we'll take it offline.
Yeah.
Okay, Matt, thank you so much again. It's been fun. I enjoyed it. I'm sure it's been super useful for listeners.
I hope
it's
so.
Great to have conversations like these for me with people like you who are not sharing theoretical concepts and ideas, but you are there, one workshop every week or something like that. So you do have a lot of experience. I've personally also learned so much. Thank you very much again. And I wish you good luck with all of your future activities.
No worries. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Matt.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like, so please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.